So that's been a huge puzzle. So that's the newest sort of discovery up to the last few weeks. And I wanted you to understand that anytime we have evidence and we reopen that case, that's a constant battle we fight in understanding these houses and in understanding these structures. You have to be open to that concept. Because if you write it down too soon, there's a chance you'll be shown that you need to rewrite it. I won't say you're wrong, you just gotta go back and reopen it, and that's fine. Write it in pencil, I love that, yes, write it down in pencil, yes, absolutely, with an eraser in hand. So, any questions before I move into the lecture for like 1 minute about that door? Because that door's been very, very misunderstood by all of us, and now we know.
And that door was put where? I mean, a lot of us know where it was, but
So the physical door itself.
the door that was taken,
that door was used in Brooklyn in that location.
okay.
But there were moldings that didn't match in the hall that they had pulled out of other houses. It got really confusing really fast. So anyway, it's 106 years worth of history in that place. It changes fast. Fancy discoveries. We're going to switch and talk about the outside from the inside. That's the whole point in this lecture. If I will go the right way, we'll have a good time. There we go. The beginning of the exterior of the Cupola house's study actually began about 100 years ago. A young man named Mac Chappell is the first person to actually have a written dialogue that describes the outside of the house that I'm aware of. And he describes it in a very short way, but he's clear. He says that in front of the second story projects 12 inches over the first story. So that's the jetty we talk about all the time. And its projection is decorated with brackets. We can see them. And this was not done with a view to more space, but to break the perpendicular surface and thus ornament the house. That was his opinion based on his observations in 1915. He also had the chance to go through that house with Tilly Bond. His purpose in being there was to write his senior paper. He would have seen the house like this. This was full of Miss Tilly Bond's family heirlooms, furniture, etc. This photograph was taken in 1918, right before something else was about to happen, along with this photograph of the parlor. And the Cupola House Association still has that clock. This mantle was just installed recently, and you see that when you go over there. In February of 1918, a man named Andre Roof received this telegram. He says, the house in Edenton has been purchased and you are asked to go south to supervise its dismantling. That's the beginning of the move to Brooklyn. Just a few weeks later, the house was emptied to look like this in preparation for that woodwork to be removed. Those two photographs, by the way, are just about 3 weeks apart, 4 weeks apart apparently. This letter was written by Andre Roof from the Bayview Hotel back to Brooklyn on March 5th, and he says, today the woodwork in the parlor, the first which we are to take, has been taken down and made way for shipment. It was already out of there and gone. It was headed to a rail car and would have left in August of 1918. But the study of the Cupola House did not end there. The study of the Cupola House continued all the way through today, particularly beginning again in 1941 when the most sort of understood, recognizable document next in line was written by Francis Benjamin Johnson, Thomas Waterman, published in 1941, called the Early Architecture of North Carolina. In that, Mr. Thomas Waterman describes his version of the understanding of the exterior. He says the design of the house is one of the most striking essays in Jacobean style in America. Every feature of the exterior except for the windows is of this style. And the photograph on the left that's in the book was taken by Francis Benjamin Johnson, gives us that perspective from the sidewalk. Again, Bruce Cheeseman continues that study. In fact, this is the most comprehensive study to date on the Cupola House. This 3-volume, over 600-page document is invaluable to our study and understanding of the house. 1989 rolls around and a group ended up bringing in probably the most advanced technology at the time, and the first time that technology really became part of the study besides photographs. And this is an x-ray machine that was brought in, and they x-rayed that jetty that's kind of stumped everybody for so long, trying to understand why is that jetty here, why does this house look like this, and how was it built. They wrote, after that study, and spent a few days, they wrote the article for the Mesda Journal. And in that article, John Bivens is quoted as saying that the house is actually an anomaly, and that aligning the house with a Jacobean style is inadequate from more than one viewpoint. About 20 years later, in the early 2010s, about 2010 actually, a new roof was being put on, and they discovered flush sheathing below the cupola's raised, paneled portion in the neck, if you will, coming up. There were actually flush sheathing there, just like on the right, located where the yellow box is on the left, where shingles are now. That flush sheathing would have been the original exposed feature. And in that flush sheathing within it, located where these arrows are cut-off joists that used to extend out. Those joists were part of a system that Don Jordan has drawn up right here for the floors that used to cantilever out and created a walk around the cupola. We heard about Miss Tilly Bond talking about taking T up in the cupola and on the walk, and actually Mac Chappell describes an area within that cupola that didn't have plaster and was possibly a door. Well, that was confirmed in 2010, 2011 by Don Jordan and Peter Post. To understand that gives clarity, but we don't know if she actually took T on it. We know there was a walk though, so that part's been confirmed. And also to sort of reiterate that, there was a door located at this position. This is the one that Mac Chappell described, and they confirmed that with panel locations here highlighted in yellow when they pulled some of the panels off. Our work just about a year ago today, we were probably in this space roughly. And we emptied the house from the 1960s woodwork, and that unveiled the framing. And that's when our study of the exterior really began, because we could isolate original framework and understand what to do. We also had some major repairs along the house. That kind of brought in perspective Penelope Barker Bond's will, where she describes giving her son a piece of land for all the repairs that he had done to her dwelling house. And we saw those repairs were extensive. You've also heard a lecture on that in this room describing the repairs for Penelope. They affected every wall of the house. And Don Jordan also found, located here, was some rusticated siding bits. That was the first example of that. We found more in our work over the last year. Numerous examples of rusticated siding being used as nailers and patches and parts and pieces to make repairs during that 1820s up to maybe 1830 repair campaign that was so extensive. The biggest discovery about rusticated siding came in Brooklyn when we removed the back downstairs room that was painted green that everybody remembers was set up as an office. That northwest chambers mantel actually was made from rusticated siding, and the panels located at these two yellow boxes it gave evidence for that, and Susan Buck was actually able to use that for paint analysis to confirm her previous results about the exterior. These are heavily weathered and reused, and it gave us a baseline of understanding when this mantle went on, because the front side of that mantle is painted green with chrome yellow. You've heard us talk about chrome yellow. Its baseline is about 1820 and when used in commercial applications for paint. So this mantle becomes vitally important, not only understanding where more rusticated siding actually had to be on the house than what we see on the cupola, but actually when it was installed. It gives us a baseline for that. So we began to understand just how extensive these impacts of the repairs and changes were in this early 19th century structure through the removal of the interior. That's actually when the house became what we know today as a cupola house. It went from Corbin's house to the cupola house. If you walk outside today, you see the results of those 1820s repairs and changes. And that's always thrown a curveball to the understanding and interpretation of the house. As a result of removing the interior, as I said, we were able to target original materials, studs and things like that. So we went around the front, we removed siding, and at the intervals that you see these strings, that is where we were able to identify the first period siding. That is rusticated siding located on a 9-inch spacing. On the back of the house, we had wider spacing. 13 inches is what it was the average interval. Probably flush sheathing, not rusticated siding. Two examples of rusticated siding in Virginia. The most notable is Mount Vernon, but one maybe unknown version, we've talked about it here though, is up in Dumfries. The photograph on the left is from the Habs files, and that building is gone. It has been torn down. But if you notice, the rusticated siding is small. That's about 7 or 8 inches according to the door height. On the right is the kitchen at Mount Vernon. It has 9 or 10 inch rusticated siding, a lot like what the cupola house had and still has on the cupola. But notice the flush sheathing wrapped around the sides. So the cupola house would have looked a lot like this building in its prime when it had rusticated siding and flush sheathing. The biggest advantage to having the interior out is to get to see all the framework and understand if any of it's real. In our work on the inside, we removed the cornice from the dining room and the passage in the parlor along the front wall. And when we did, we discovered these joists were cut off. These are short cuts, they were not cut off, they were actually pinned and lapped in to the front header. So what are they? We realized when we pulled some flooring up, we got an advantage to see that and look down on it, that this member was actually cut off. This short joist was cut, but it was pinned at the rear and cut on the front, located here. It used to extend out past the header of the house, creating part of the jetty. So, when you look at the jetty, you actually see iron pins. They discovered those in the x-rays. This jetty plate that you see now, if you go in the house and look at that floor in this photograph, is what's here now. But both can't be real. So which one is it? Is it this or what was there before? Obviously what was there before was cut off. So it's what was there first. So that means that the jetty system that we see now is real, but the support for it is not first period. And if the iron bars that attach it, the iron spikes, are actually spikes driven in from the outside, not rivets like they thought on the x-rays, that means that something was very different. It was actually a much more conventional style construction. The Cupola House jetty was chalked up as being some sort of almost like boat-like builder's approach. But what we realize is that it's actually a very conventional construction method we see in houses all the time, in hip roofs just like this one. It creates the overhang that opposes the natural overhang for the joists that want to run front to back. And the photograph on the left is a sketch of what the Cupola House jetty construction looked like in an exploded view. So what about these iron rivets or spikes? They're actually spikes driven in also through the corbels or those brackets. Remember the brackets that are mentioned in Mac Chappell's report? Well, if you walk out the front now, you'll see those. They're actually held on to these same iron spikes just like the rest of it. So what does all this mean? If you step back outside and you look up, you will see the same effect on the cupola. The cupola has carved brackets that extend over. They're actually part of the roof structure. They're not applied. They have carved elements carved with acanthus leaves, just like the purlins and false plates, and all the other members of the house that extend out past the wall that are framing. Imagine that element that I just showed you that used to extend out, extending out again, just like the cupola above. These red blocks in the bottom indicate what that would have looked like. The original finial, located on the left, is carved with acanthus leaves. The east finial that still is on the house is also carved with acanthus leaves. These are vertical members. We have acanthus leaves on the mantel consoles inside the house. So what about these brackets that are smooth? They're not carved. Remember, they're not first period now. We know that. But we have nailers beside them for siding, for the rusticated siding. So there were brackets at these locations. So these brackets would have certainly been carved like the brackets that we see inside and the finials that we see outside. So imagine in your mind's eye, a lot more carving than what you see today below the jetty. What we begin to see is the jetty had a purpose. It wasn't to add space. It's just like Mac Chappell said. They didn't need another foot of space along the front wall, but it may well have been just simply a place to put more carving and more ornamentation on this house. We begin to paint the picture of what it looked like when we add all this together. You would have had vertical elements with acanthus leaf carving and horizontal elements with acanthus leaf carving as well. We also discovered evidence for the front door. We found mortises and brackets behind the pilasters that are there now. The brackets were located where the green boxes are and mortises where the red boxes are. So we've still got a lot of investigation to do. We still got a lot more to understand. But the porch you see now probably replaced some other porch element. The question is, are any of the components within this porch original? And that's what we don't know. If you look up from the porch, you'll notice in the front gable, these cut off beams. They've stumped us for a long time, haven't they, Don? We've always wanted to know what these were. The logical conclusion at this point, with the evidence we have, is that more than likely, these two cut-off beams played a bigger role than what we see. They're not an integral part of the roof structure. They're just short, tacked on. But the house on the right is the Edwards house in Charleston. And notice it has enclosed pediment. And on the left, we just have a gable. Pediment on the right, you have a window. We have an ocular window sort of up high in that gable. But imagine if we were to reconstruct the elements that may be missing if we find the evidence for a gable enclosure, which would make it a pediment. Proper pediment would actually fit what we have, and it gives a reason for that ocular window being up in the top third.
Andrew, does the Edwards house have rusticated siding?
And the Edwards house, this photograph doesn't do it very good justice, but yes, the Edwards house, that's a good point, does have rusticated siding. In fact, it's the only house, if I'm right, in South Carolina with rusticated siding. It has flush sheathing up in the pediment and rusticated siding here with brackets coming down. And if you notice the green blocks on the left could represent locations where brackets could be. We don't have the evidence for them, but the one thing I will say is that the windows are spaced enough to allow for it. So there's reasonable suspicion to look further. We're starting to build a case to do more. Discoveries came in other ways as well while we're doing the house, or while doing the work in the house. Robert, around Thanksgiving, discovered a very important document that had a signature by a man named Martin von Eventon, or Eventon. Martin is here by 1759 and gone by 1761. That's a very important time for him to be here because there's this house called the Cupola house whose dendro date puts it between 1759 and 1760. A great time for this man to be in town. Circumstantial evidence points to this man, Samuel Black, and this man, John Green, as being part of the Cupola house, simply because they have the ability and they're in the right town at the right time. Well, so is Mr. Martin von Eventon, who signed the same document with them. So they're all here with the skill sets. But Martin von Eventon brings some things to the table that we don't know about with these other guys. Not saying they don't have the ability, but we don't know about it. We do know about Martin's capabilities. He advertises in the Virginia Gazette that he is able to do things that are done inside the house. Particularly, he has a focus on working in the 5 branches of the ancient orders and doing ornamental architecture in the Gothic, Chinese, and modern taste, etc. He also advertises later on his probably kinsman, maybe brother, Morris Eventon, advertises at Martin's death as his inventory of books right here. Lists books by writers like Swan, Payne, Langley, and Halfpenny. These are architectural books, and these are all examples of some of the work that could have been found in the Cupola house or is associated with the work of the Cupola house. Les Payne, he comes later, but Swan, Langley, and Halfpenny, you can find examples of their work inside that house. Just like this. These are all pattern book inspired motifs, carvings, door surrounds, and even the front door is out of Palladio Londinensis. These carving motifs are also pattern book inspired. You have Anthenium with egg and dart, or egg and anchor on the left, egg and dart surrounds, and then acanthus with opposed balusters at the bottom, and the same thing repeated on the right in the mantle. These are book plates from all of those authors. Halfpenny, Langley, Swan, Salmon wrote Palladio Londinensis. Notice the front door. Swan, the staircase. Langley, the opposed turnings. Now, these aren't indicative to these writers, but there are examples right here of Batty Langley mentioning his version versus some of the predecessors he has pulled ideas off of. And if you notice some of these motifs at the bottom, Abraham Swan again with the staircase. So the Cupola house, as it stands today, has been a bit of an anomaly, just like John Bivens described it, when you look at it through this perspective. But let's take a step back and think about some things. We have a very advanced interior. It follows a lot of the architectural orders described in those pattern books. Well, what happened to the exterior? Because this isn't pattern book inspired. This isn't classical. Nothing about this sort of defies classicism in a lot of ways. Until you realize that we've been looking at it through a lens that was probably put together in 1820, not 1758. Elements that we have missed and overlooked over the years, like curved roof lines. See the sweep in the roof line? These carved brackets have been talked about, but not in the context with the interior. You see, these carved elements are attached to members that are actually part of the roof structure. That means the carver was there when the building was being constructed. That's now understood, that we can correlate that with what went on the inside. So the same carvers are working on the outside as it's being constructed, and then working on the interior as it's being finished. Richard Parsons, who's been here to hear lectures and is one of my mentors, I was just with him a few hours ago, said in the 1989 Mesda Journal article, this is his quote. He said they should lay aside all existing information and thesis and examine the house's newly discovered object. And my opinion is, I think we ought to do the same today. I think we ought to take back what we have looked at, put it in a pile with what we know now, and let's re-examine this thing almost as a new discovery. What we might see is that the Cupola house that you see out here today, compared to the book plates that we know about, like halfpenny, I was corrected, by the way. A gentleman told me over the weekend a proper Brit would call this haypenny. So haypenny on the right and left drew these book plates. Does the one on the right remind you of anything? Just say it. Here's a conjectural drawing I've put together that includes all the elements that we know about and the ones that we're suspicious about based on evidence, not just conjectural mindset. We are actually seeing evidence for these things. And when you put it all together, you have something very different from anything that we see in the United States today, and probably was seen in colonial America when it was built. So that's why it looks like an anomaly to us, because it doesn't look like it did when it was constructed. But we're going to pursue this even further, because at this point, I feel like we have built a case and we have enough evidence to get a warrant to go for more. I would think so. Does anybody have any questions about what is on the screen? And does it not make sense?
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
So much. I think gives us lots to think about. Some of us who are on the woodwork committee are just kind of overwhelmed with all of this new evidence.
Me
But
too.
it's so exciting. It really is. It's so exciting for all of us to find out all these things that are happening. I want to thank again so much for Andrew. You've got so much on your plate right now with trying to take care of all these new discoveries and taking care of Hayes, and for you to make the time to speak to us is just wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Just
It's
want
an
to
honor.
thank you
I
so
appreciate it.
much.
Thank
It's an
you.
honor for us.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions?
I just think it's amazing that every time you come to us, you roll
Something
out
else?
something, not
I'm
insignificant,
not holding back, I promise you. It's every day.
significant. Yes, thank you so
This
much.
is,
There's
I'll
more
say,
to come.
there's more to come. Don and I have been digging all week. There's more. There's a whole nother lecture, but just in a storage space. There's a lecture about there. I want to say something to you all that I couldn't say when I was given the opportunity to give the same lecture a few weeks ago. Just last weekend, Robert, correct me the name, the American Society
Center for Palladian Studies.
American Center for Palladian Studies. I'll always make their name something not. They were here. This is Palladian. The interior of that house is the best example of Palladian architecture in North Carolina, and one of the best in the South in the colonial period. It bats in the league with houses that we hear all the time, like Drayton Hall and others. There's a long list. The Cupola house stands alone in North Carolina, though. It is the best example and the most extensive example. It has more exterior carving than any of the other houses really in the South, possibly in the colonial period. And it's missing half of it. Imagine what it would look like if you look at this conjectural drawing of all that. But when those guys were here, they were blown away by this house. This house is much more important than I think even myself, and I think all of us realize now. And because of these exterior discoveries and the ones to come, because we're gonna need to do more research, we have got to confirm some things. Don and I are suspicious about a lot of things, but we're solid on some things. We have the evidence, but we're gonna go further. So I just wanna reiterate the fact that this thing is getting national attention. And there are a gentleman that was here last week named Calder Lowe. If you wanna hear lectures about Palladianism and understand the lingo and understand, look up Calder Lowe on YouTube and just listen to him. He's a great lecturer, and he was pretty impressed with this place and Hayes, by the way, over the weekend. So maybe we'll get him back for a lecture.
Calder's had about 1 million viewers.
He's had over 1 million views on
About
YouTube of his
1 million
lectures.
viewers.
He's a fantastic lecturer, and he can put these things in layman's terms in a way like almost nobody else can. So I advise you, recommend, just look him up on YouTube, and maybe we'll have him back.
Robert has
talk about the Cupola House.
Gotten him
We're
to say
bringing his
that
arm.
he's coming,
We're
so-
twisting his
We're
arm a
hoping
little
to
bit.
have him for 2027, and we'd like to continue to have Andrew speak with us because there is always
There'll be
something
more.
new, and that's exciting. So I know he's busy, but I think you'd all agree that these are fascinating insights into new discoveries that we're always finding out.
This is part of that documentation process.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
check online. Andrew's got a wonderful website, and he
Yeah.
keeps up to date. So
Facebook
you
and
can see that
Instagram,
too.
yeah,
Facebook and Instagram.
Can you talk about, if we, in the future, open up additional exterior investigations, what specifically are the questions you would want to pursue? What are the elements you would want to look at
Yeah.
more? Can you kind of sort of like point them out?
So one of the focuses in that exterior investigative phase we would like to do and plan to do begins around the front door. Around that evidence that we found for a front door, we need to know more about the width, the height, any information we can gather about a front door, a front porch. The problem with a front porch on this house is we don't know what a 1760s front porch looks like. They almost don't exist. Most of them didn't have it to begin with, did they, Robert? Little frontispieces or stoops and things like that. So we've got substantial evidence for something there. The other things we would want to focus on is above the jetty or the overhang, confirm or deny any use of rusticated siding, whatever locations we find above. We do have some evidence that it was there. The windowsills already tell us a little bit from the outside, and we would want to map that just like below. That has not been done. And then further up into this area, we would want to know more about that gable. That gable is, again, the word anomaly sort of applies to that. It makes a lot more sense if it's a pediment, I'll just say. So we would want to focus our efforts around this window in the center. Don't let that distract you that it's not dead in the center. This house is symmetrical, a little sloppy, but it is symmetrical. There's 2 windows on the right, 2 on the left, and 1 in the middle. That's symmetry in the general term. But we want to know a little bit more about it. And we would like to know if we can figure out why that window is not in. What, is something changed? Is something moved? Did something get fixed or repaired? Was there, it was a major intervention, by the way, to replace that jetty's support system. The whole jetty's support underneath was taken out and a new one was put in. It was a major surgery. But we can pretty well read it now, knowing that that thing was put in sections, and it was attached with these big iron spikes. So it makes a lot of sense now, but it also makes sense why they had to do it. So there will also be more focus put right here along that jetty. We'll take some more siding off above and below, and then underneath, and try to get a complete understanding of that. I think the word would be probable cause. We have probable cause to look for. That's the major focus for the exterior. And it would be interesting. Don and I were just talking about the photograph in the very beginning. I don't know if you noticed, but there were stone steps on the front. They were not wooden. They're photographs of them. We don't know what happened to them. They were there up until the 1930s. I think they're in some later photographs. But are they an indication of the porch's original configuration? Where were they? Ultimately, does archaeology need to be done around that front porch? That's very likely that would actually give us the depth of the porch. But we also need to focus on the porch itself. We know there's some reused material, and I've actually climbed up inside there, and I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna lay off a few meals before I get in there. There's a tight squeeze when I get in there. So, but I'm gonna go back in there, but more paint analysis is in order, I think, for that targeted paint analysis on that porch to give us an idea. Are any of the moldings or any of the trim pieces original? Did they seem, one thing they seemed to do in the 1820s work was simplify everything they did. They omitted a lot of complicated stuff, and whatever they put back was very simple. But that porch kind of defies that. It's not simple. It is simple. It's not ornate, but it's also pretty good. It's kind of better than the work that they did in the 1820s work. And then there's another logical question. We may not know what an 1760s porch looks like, but we sure know what a 1820s porch looks like in Eatonton and in the surrounding area, and they do not look like this. So my question has been, did they reconstruct something that they were looking at? Did they simply just put back a new version, maybe a simplified version of what they had? There's a lot of questions on the front porch. So front porch, front door area, and then up from there. And along the sides also, we still have to confirm a few things about the siding. But the back, I feel confident. I think Don does too. I hope he does, because if not, get back up. The siding on the back was almost certainly was flush sheet. It looked like the kitchen at Mount Vernon I showed y'all earlier. So that's one thing. And then up high, up here, we've got some investigative work to do to understand more about the confirmed wall. And the door inside the cupola, there's an area of plaster that I feel like we probably should remove. It wasn't there in 1915. And there's clearly a door in that location. There's lots of evidence. So door investigation, and then the roof investigation. Up in the cupola, we need to know more about that overhang so we understand completely what we're dealing with downstairs. Interesting sort of note as well, the brackets up underneath the cupola that I was showing you earlier, that if you walk out there, they're carved, they're the same size. They're 4 inches by 6 inches by 13 inches, which is what these brackets that we found had been cut off, or these joists, they're 4 inches by 6 inches, and the jetty is about 12, 13 inches. Kind of interesting.
What
Yes.
about the kitchen? Is that something for the future?
That's not for me to even
That's-
discuss. That's
okay.
a
So
cupola
far
house board
away?
thing.
It's way out
I'll
there?
tell you what I know about the kitchen. It's on the Saltier map, and it's on the Sanborn map.
Okay.
And that's all I know about it. And the Sanborn map gives you window location and doors. And then, they did have some GPR work done. We don't have that result back yet.
Okay.
But hopefully, that can be a discussion that they'll have
Down the road.
later. I'm strictly here to focus on that
Yeah.
big, weird thing right there called the cupola house.
Quite
So,
Project.
I think it's really important to understand the whole context of the whole place and anything we can gather.
Yeah.
Am I curious about the kitchen? Absolutely, but I'm a lot more curious about
those
next
are
winter
really
pulling some of the siding off. Any more questions before we wrap up? Yes,
So you said that there was x-rays done in 1989?
89, yes, sir.
Is it still radioactive where they did the x-rays?
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know. We got more lead paint that I worry about, but I don't know about that. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe we need to add that to the list. Yes.
Line drawings,
Mhm.
buildings that period, do line drawings exist, or is it just?
Rarely. And for this building, we have no documentation of its construction, its inspiration, besides the evidence that you just heard. Everything we know about the construction of this house, really, besides circumstantial evidence that we see, it just doesn't exist. There are
Would
mentions of.
Any in the south or the north at that period, would they?
Oh, there are,
There
but
are, yeah.
none of them look like this.
There's some period,
There's some period.
there's some
oh,
period.
Very good period.
18th century elevations in Drayton Hall.
Oh, yes, Drayton
Yeah,
Hall,
yeah.
and then you have, as you get in later, yes, there are architects that are hired, and there are discussions, but we don't have any drawings, man, what would I give for that?
But what is clear though, is that these things we have seen were planned from the very beginning,
Absolutely.
because they're part of the internal structure of that building. And they were put there when that house was framed. None of this stuff was tacked on later.
Which is really important, the bricks were laid under that house, I've crawled all under it. The bricks were laid, the way the foundation is laid for that house, and then the way the framework that Don is describing from there up, always was intended for what you see. That house, that cupola is not a modification to that house. It is a integral first period element. And the framework that goes down and the jetty, even the way the jetty is constructed, it considers the load above it. The construction is built to handle the load above it. The jetty really doesn't handle any load. The jetty is only holding itself up effectively.
Wow.
So one thing that I didn't mention this time that I was trying to make sure I did that was really important. Those brackets are equidistant, not brackets, the joists that are cut off that stick out horizontally across this front facade, they are located in it. They're spaced on 28-inch centers. Remember I talked about 18-inch centers earlier? Those are 28 inches apart. What does that mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot until you put it in the context of the room and the spacing of the windows. They are equidistant between the brackets and every element that defines that opening. They're spaced between it. So they give up sort of a Mendelian effect or almost a dental effect. They're evenly spaced. And once we realized that, that's when Don and I could say they were put on 28-inch centers perfectly so they could be seen. And when you go outside and you look back at that conjectural sort of thing, it's hard to see in this drawing, but they are spaced evenly. So one thing we would like to do when we do this investigation, one thing I'd like to do is mock up some of these, once we have that siding off, and mock up these locations and see what that looks like to the eye. I mean, once you realize that these are elements that are missing, this all starts to make sense. This thing doesn't look like some anomaly when you put the package together. But when the bottom half looks like 1820 and the top half looks like 1760 modern, remember Martin von Eventon describes being able to do things in the modern taste. Modern is not our interpretation of modern. That's 1760 modern. That's this whimsical, fancy, almost something that most people would have never seen. It looks like something from a foreign country because it's kind of inspired by that. But it's seeded with elements of classical architecture. The rusticated siding, that is very classical. That's pure classical architecture. So things are seeded and classical elements are put in. Any more questions? Well, thank y'all. Thank you, Chuck.
Just a reminder that we have one more speaker series that's going to conclude our 2026 speaker series program, and that's on May 7th, and it's going to be Christopher Grimes, and he's going to be talking about Hugh Williamson. And I would like to thank you all for supporting the Cupola House, and just to remind you, a great way of supporting the Cupola House is Easels in the Garden. It's coming up Friday and Saturday. It's our big fundraiser once every 2 years. So we do ask you to support us and show up and enjoy the beautiful gardens. And again, thank you so much for being here tonight, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.